Welcome back to PCW, where today we'll be talking about last night's Monday Night Raw. Raw last night began the build to Wrestlemania Backlash, a pay-per-view name to try and double down on the Wrestlemania name so that viewers on Peacock who don't regularly watch wrestling are drawn to it in the same way they were to the big brand of Wrestlemania. Raw itself started well, but definitely did not stick the landing, and we did see a lot of repetition, or at least promised future repetition, for ongoing storylines. Rumoured returns didn't really happen, but we did have one unrumoured return, which is quite fun. I'm Tom Collihew, and I'm going to break down all the action right here for PCW, so make sure to click like on this video, comment with your opinions about Raw, and subscribe if you haven't already. Raw this week started with Matt Riddle challenging Bobby Lashley to a championship match after having lost a championship match for a worse championship the night before WrestleMania. A very, very bold move which didn't really pay off for Matt Riddle. He got the crap kicked out of him, pillar to post, the entire time, and then put out by the Hurt Lock. It's good to see that Bobby Lashley is going to be a fighting champion. However, at the same time, we've seen him destroy Matt Riddle for months now. I would like to see some move forward from here and get some new opponents under Bobby Lashley's belt. We had a backstage promo featuring Rhea Ripley in which she was able to establish more of her personality, talking about a brutal new order that was Rhea Ripley's title reign, or thus is the plan. This was not a bad start by any means, and really we need to see Ripley establishing herself for viewers who don't regularly watch NXT. At the same time though, they did announce a rematch, so a repeat, against Asuka for the Raw Women's Championship, the only difference now being the champion. A lot of effort was made this week with the WWE Raw Tag Division, which is now helmed of course by AJ Styles and Omos, who didn't feature. This is something that has needed to happen for a while. We've seen it on SmackDown recently, but this went a long way when you look at the teams that have been established. This started with the return of the Viking Raiders against Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin. Ivar has been missing for a while due to injury. It is great to see him back, and interestingly, just after someone the size of Omos wins the Tag Championship, we get the Viking Raiders back, who are probably the only people who can physically compete. At the same time though, this wasn't a great look for Alexander and Benjamin, who lost in about 5 minutes without looking particularly dominant for any of it. They competed, they were made to look good at certain points, but ultimately they look like they're just going to be another body in the tag division, whereas previously with Hurt Business, they were champions and chasing champions. Charlotte Flair returned and cut the promo that she tends to cut on pretty much all wrestling journalists whenever they ask her about reception from the fans. If you have been listening to interviews, you've probably heard all this before, very much about her being the opportunity, creating opportunities for others, and it did come across as an entitled heel promo. Whether that was the intention or not, we'll have to wait and see, but it does become clear afterwards. Ripley and Asuka competed for the WWE Raw Women's Championship in what started off as a very good match but became a little bit sloppy by the end. Rhea Ripley continually going for the same move, which didn't quite pay off as I'd imagine they were hoping for. This was all brought to an end when Asuka hit the DDT onto the apron, and with both women down, Charlotte Flair came down, running down the ramp in her heels, dropping them like Matt Riddle just as she got to the ring, and then attacking both women. Her focus was on Asuka, meaning that she was focusing her attacks on the face, even though I think Rhea Ripley's always going to need sweetened audio if you want people to boo her, because they're not going to. It looks like we're heading towards a triple threat match at WrestleMania Backlash, which I personally would be very, very happy with. I think this could be a big help in establishing Rhea Ripley, not just beating Asuka again, but also beating Charlotte Flair. Of course, people are going to be very worried about Charlotte taking the title away from Rhea immediately, and that's something that the WWE has trained us to think, so we'll see if that actually happens. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler are mocking Mandy Rose backstage. Shayna Baszler walks off when Mandy Rose appears, allowing Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke to attack Nia Jax. This is a storyline that gets a bit strange. Alexa Bliss formalised her betrayal of Bray Wyatt and showed that she's now led by someone new, a doll called Lily. This is short for Lilith, which is of course a popular demonic figure and well worth checking out. This was a last minute change at WrestleMania and a last minute doll creation, so it's very interesting to see how they're going to play it out. For me, The Fiend has very much jumped the shark, but for a lot of people it hasn't, and when it comes to WrestleMania, the ending of the match was booed, but the beginning of the match was cheered. People want to get behind The Fiend, it seems like the WWE don't. Miz TV was essentially a promo for Miz and Mrs, but we did see the return of Maurice, who has been long missed at the Miz's corner. Damian Priest would come down to essentially pick a fight after the Miz tries to take credit for Bad Bunny. Damian Priest instead wants credit for Bad Bunny, and this leads to a handicap match which Damian Priest loses when instead of just fighting 2 people, he also has to compete with Maurice distracting from the outside. This is Damian Priest's first loss and works for a positive and a negative. In the positive side, it took 3 people to actually stop him, but for the negative, it kind of shows that without Bad Bunny, he can't pick up a win. He can strip The Miz down to his underwear though, which is a victory after all. Nia Jax and Shayna Baszler took on Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke in a match that didn't last particularly long, but to be fair, gave us a lot more women's wrestling than we had the week before. The confusing part though was seeing Mandy Rose and Dana Brooke take a count out intentionally because Nia Jax was apparently a bit clumsy and they didn't want to be anywhere near that. Shows how much they value the women's championships. At the beginning of hour 3 we finally had the announcement of our main event, which for me is simply far too late in the show. Of course, it does suggest that there were a lot of rewrites going on. MVP stood in the middle of the ring, ready to make an announcement and an address. No Bobby Lashley featured here, but MVP was interrupted first by Drew McIntyre, then by Braun Strowman, and finally by Randy Orton. This naturally led to a triple threat match, which would take place at the end of the night to determine the #1 contender for Wrestlemania Backlash. The most confusing part for me here is that we didn't see Bo Dallas, because clearly if you want a WWE Championship match, all you've got to do is be in the right place at the right time, walk down the ramp and say, yeah, but me though. I think all wrestling companies can take a lead from WWE here and make sure that whoever they want as their next champion just sort of turns up. That's all you need. In a continued build towards that pre-mentioned tag division, the New Day took on and defeated Jackson Ryker and Elias. It's been a long time, but originally when the Forgotten Sons vanished from TV, a large part of that was teams like the New Day refusing to work with Jackson Ryker, so something's clearly changed there. The win was necessary for the New Day given how they were made to look a bit foolish by Omos at WrestleMania. That said, they did earn this, and Elias and Jackson Ryker weren't made to look too bad in defeat. I would expect to see the Viking Raiders taking on Jackson Ryker and Elias in the near future as they continue to build towards their championship match against Styles and Omos. For now though, I wouldn't have them as the #1 contenders just yet. Just before the main event, we had a Firefly Funhouse segment in which Bray Wyatt essentially said good riddance to Alexa Bliss. That man is heartbroken and there is a rebound coming, so I worry for the next girl he kidnaps. I mean, I obviously worry for any girl that he kidnaps. I just want to undo all that. Finally, our main event, which lasted about 12 minutes, featured Drew McIntyre, Randy Orton and Braun Strowman, essentially resetting the field for the top of the division now that Randy Orton has essentially just decided to ignore the Fiend because he hit that RKO that one time. He was spitting up black tar for months, but it's all fine now. Braun Strowman as well got here by beating up Shane McMahon, which is an incredible achievement given that Shane McMahon is literally the best in the world. The winner in an inventive manner pinning Randy Orton after delivering a Claymore to a prone Randy Orton in the middle of a pin of Braun Strowman was Drew McIntyre. Drew McIntyre will get a WrestleMania rematch against Bobby Lashley at WrestleMania Backlash. Another repeat, another rematch, but at the same time in the build to WrestleMania, Lashley and McIntyre were kept relatively separate by Sheamus and by The Miz, meaning that there is still some life in this particular feud. Finally, after the match, Drew McIntyre was attacked by Mace and T-Bar, formerly of Retribution, now apparently of the Hurt Business. That is an interesting choice, and we'll have to wait and see how that factors into things. But Retribution, of course, dead. Flapjack and Reckoning will likely be going back to NXT, but it was very clear when the breakup happened that T-Bar and Mace would be staying on Raw. This is them in action doing that. Raw this week started well, but didn't really finish well for me. The new announced team featuring Adnan Virk was good, it was okay. I sort of faded everyone but Corey Graves out into the background after a very short amount of time, and it became clear that Adnan Virk, while introducing a lot of energy and excitement, didn't really know too much about wrestling. That's something he can learn with time, and it's possible he was quite nervous because he did talk over people quite a lot. The setup going into WrestleMania Backlash seems repetitive, but not unexciting. McIntyre and Lashley delivered a very good match at WrestleMania, and more of that isn't a bad thing. Adding Charlotte Flair to the match of Asuka and Rhea Ripley is just adding more star power and quality to that match as well, so I'm excited to see what they do there. Outside of that, we'll see what SmackDown delivers, because ultimately WrestleMania was a bit more about SmackDown than Raw. Meanwhile, as I have mentioned, The Fiend has jumped the shark for me, so while I'm interested in the storyline for Alexa Bliss and Bray Wyatt, for me, it always feels a little bit unsatisfying because we never really get a payoff. We just go from one phase of the story to the next phase of the story ad infinitum. The tag division got a bit of love. The women's tag division kind of got a bit of love, but also some very confusing moments, and a number of wrestlers were made to look a bit weak. A real shame in that regard, but for the new season after WrestleMania, we do need a reset. Hopefully we will see a shake-up in the weeks to come, but for now, if this is how Raw is going to pan out, they need to start paying off some of these storylines and give us some new things as well. I've been Tom Collihew. This has been your Raw review for the PCW Wrestling channel. You'll hear more from us in the future about independent wrestling on demand and of course PCW shows. In the future I will be doing a list video about the best matches of WrestleMania, and we will be hearing from PCW talent about WrestleMania. Please remember to click like, subscribe if you haven't already, comment on your thoughts of Raw, and we will see you next time.